Story 1. B. When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to move out. I was down on my luck with my living situation. I could only crash on the couches of my friends for so long. I was looking on all the roommate and apartment apps and websites, and I found something that caught my eye on this app. A man named Luke had listed a room for rent in his 3-bedroom, 1-story house. The rent price was $1,200 a month. He'd basically be my landlord and roommate, as he would also be living in the house. He made sure to note on the ad that he'd be out of the house most of the time and that the renter would have the place to themselves often. He did put in all capital letters a few ground rules, though, including no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and no use of the basement. They seemed like pretty standard rules. I went to view the house in person and meet Luke. The second he opened the door, I got a bit of a read on him that he was a little reclusive. His demeanor was quiet and a little awkward. He showed me the house. I could tell he was nervous because his voice would shake and he would stutter. The bedroom was a good size, and the actual floor plan of the house was good. It was an open layout, meaning the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all one big open space. For $1,000 a month in my area, it was a steal. He laid out some more ground rules in person and emphasized again how I can't go in the attic or the basement, as he used them for storage only. It sounded fair enough. On the spot, I told him I was interested. We shook hands, I left, and 2 days later I was moving in. We didn't draft any sort of lease or contract. I was just going to be paying him off the books month to month, the first day of every month. I had settled in pretty quickly. The bedroom I was renting was already furnished with a bed and basic furniture, so all I did really was hang some of my wall decor and fill the dresser and closet with clothes. The bedroom had a lock on it, thankfully, and he gave me the key to it so I could lock it when he wasn't home, which seemed like a nice gesture at first. Luke never told me what he did for work. He just told me he usually wouldn't be home, but I quickly learned that wasn't true. Anytime I'd come home from work, his car was always in the driveway. Quickly, I started to pick up on loud sounds outside of my bedroom at night, from footsteps to doors opening and closing constantly. One night I went out in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom and noticed the basement door was opened. I walked over to the top of the stairs and looked down. There was a dim light from down there, seemingly from a far corner out of view. I heard banging sounds coming from down there. It was like 2 a.m. What could he be doing down there? Then the banging stopped, and Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me. It was so creepy that describing it in words doesn't do it justice. He looked visibly annoyed as he looked up at me. I apologized and said I was just going to the bathroom. He almost angrily responded, "Shut the basement door." I listened to him, insanely weirded out. I went to the bathroom and then back to bed. I laid awake for a while after that, my mind racing, wondering what he was doing. About a week later, I returned home and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it before leaving every day. I looked around my room to see if anything was missing, and while nothing seemed to be missing, I noticed some things had been moved. For starters, my clothes in the dressers were not neatly stacked anymore. They had been looked through, I could tell. The closet door was also cracked open. It was dawning on me that he had his own key and likely came into my room and went through my stuff. This felt like a clear invasion of privacy and a violation of my tenant rights. I had to figure out how to confront him about it. I went to knock on his bedroom door, but he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway once again, so he had to be home. I was getting such weird vibes from all this. I gave up and went back to my room after microwaving my dinner. While I was in my room, relaxing and watching TV, I heard the door to Luke's room open. I took this opportunity to get up and confront him, so I went out to the living room and caught him in a hurry about to leave the house. I stopped him and asked if he went into my room. He looked at me with a blank expression and straight up said no. I delicately responded without being hostile, saying that the door was unlocked and some of my stuff appeared to have been gone through. He then claimed that I had the only key to my bedroom. Then he said he was in a hurry, he had to go, and he left. I was flabbergasted by all of this. I wanted to ask my parents for advice, but at that time I hated them and wanted nothing to do with them. I was already back on the apps and websites looking up other listings. I knew I didn't want to stay here. Then I realized this was the first apparent time that Luke wasn't home while I was. Curiosity got the better of me and I had to check out the basement. I checked out the windows first to make sure his car was gone, and it was. I then went over to open the basement door. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any light switches, so I just used the flashlight on my phone to navigate around. The steps were so creaky I felt like I was in an abandoned house. I got to the bottom, and there was a tan carpet that was curling upwards at the walls, as if it were poorly fitted to the floor. It was a very small basement, at least the main room there was. There was just this one ugly couch in the middle of the room. There was also a slightly funky smell down there, and the smell only got worse as I got closer to this door in the corner. I attempted to open the door, but unfortunately it was locked. Or maybe I should say fortunately, because I'm not sure I fully wanted to know what was in there emitting that smell. It almost smelled like raw sewage, but worse. I did one little quick sweep around the main room of the basement, though, and I found nothing. Just some taped-up cardboard boxes, which I was not going to open. I went back upstairs and shut the door. The rest of that night I stayed in my room. I never heard Luke come back. He must have gotten back after I had fallen asleep. I woke up, the room was still dark. My alarm was not going off. Something else had woken me up. I heard the floor next to my bed creak, and I turned and saw Luke leaning over my bed, looking at me. I screamed, and he replied to me to shush, and then asked me if I went into the basement. I screamed no. How did you get in here? I locked the door. He then asked me, "Are you sure?" I flipped the cards on him and yelled, "Did you come into this room when I wasn't home?" He replied. Then he turned around and walked toward the door. I asked, "How did you get in here?" Then I saw him hold up his hand in the dark. He wasn't holding anything. At the time I didn't know what it meant. He said to me before leaving the room, "I think you should find other living arrangements." Then he closed the door. I started packing right then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in that house. I knocked on his door and yelled at him to give me half of the rent money back, since I'd only been there like 2 weeks. Moments later he opened the door, and just his arm stuck out from the door holding a small stack of $100 bills. He managed to make even handing me the money insanely creepy. I grabbed it. It was only $400. Whatever, it was close enough. I just wanted to get out of there. I was fully packed and out of there within an hour. I slept in my car that night. I ended up back at my parents' house the next day, and after explaining the ludicrous situation I just went through, something changed. They were more welcoming to have me back. I still moved out a month later, but my parents and I are fine now. If you're choosing to have a random roommate from online, just be careful and use your best judgment after meeting them. Story 2. It was my junior year of college, and I had moved off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate was assigned to me by the school, as he was simply someone else who needed a place to live. His name was David, and he seemed like a nice guy at first. He was friendly, polite, and always smiling, making small talk. However, as the days went by, I began to notice strange things about him, little quirks and odd behaviors that made me uneasy. It started with David lingering in my room, asking pushy questions about my personal life and poking around my belongings. Although I initially brushed it off as harmless curiosity, it began to bother me. Then there were the sounds coming from David's room late at night, talking and shuffling noises that were slightly concerning. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself it was just David watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. One night, unable to sleep due to the strange noises, I decided to investigate. I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my ear against David's door, straining to hear what was happening inside. What I heard was unsettling David whispering to himself, his voice low and muffled. Suddenly the whispering stopped, and there was only silence. Then I heard David say my name. Did he somehow know I was outside his door? I quickly and quietly tiptoed away from his door and back to my room, sliding into bed. I was bewildered. Why was David talking to himself? Was he hiding something, or was he sleepwalking? And how did he know I was outside his room? The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of uneasiness. As the days went by and the strange sounds continued, my paranoia grew. David's behavior also became stranger. He would give me odd glances and seemed a little furtive. One night I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door closing and heard David's footsteps walking away in the hallway. This was getting out of hand. The next day I decided to confront David about his potential sleepwalking. I told him I had been hearing him walking around late at night and asked if he had any history of sleepwalking or sleep disorders. David seemed unsure at first, but eventually admitted he did tend to sleepwalk sometimes. I wasn't convinced, something still felt off. I decided to search David's room for answers. Although I knew it was risky, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I waited until David was out of the apartment and then crept into his room. I searched quickly, tearing through drawers and closets, hoping to find something that explained his nightly behavior. Just as I was about to give up, I found a small nondescript drawer hidden at the back of David's closet. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were dozens of photographs, mostly of me sleeping, along with one other guy who looked to be our age. The photos were taken from different angles and distances, some so close up that I could see the pores on my skin and individual strands of hair on my head. I felt sick as I realized David had been secretly taking pictures of me while I slept, without my knowledge or consent. I wanted to confront David to demand answers, but was afraid of what he might do or say. I took a picture of the contents of the drawer and a handful of the photos as evidence. I packed my things and showed the photos to the department in charge of student housing accommodations the next day. They assured me they would take appropriate action. I was assigned to a different apartment with a normal person who needed a roommate. I never spoke to David again. Even now, years later, I still can't shake the memory of those chilling photographs and David's whispering and creeping around at night. I never found out who the other guy in the photos was. He was likely David's old roommate, but I never learned his name. Perhaps he found out too. Story 3. Gay. It was a cold, clear night when my friend Sarah and I decided to go for a hike in the nearby forest. We had both been looking forward to this, as we enjoyed exploring nature and taking in the tranquility of the woods. We set out around dusk, hoping to reach a scenic overlook before dark. As we walked along the trail, the evening grew colder, and the forest seemed to take on a more ominous feel. The tall trees cast long shadows, and the crisp air carried an eerie quiet. We joked about how the woods felt like a scene from a horror movie, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping in. After about an hour of hiking, we reached the overlook and were rewarded with a breathtaking view of the city lights below. We took some pictures, chatted, and enjoyed the serene beauty of the night. As we prepared to head back, we noticed that the sky was darkening faster than expected. We retraced our steps along the trail, but the forest seemed different now. The familiar path appeared altered, and we soon realized we were lost. We tried to stay calm and used our phone's GPS to find our way back, but the signal was weak, and our location kept shifting. The cold began to bite, and a sense of urgency set in. We noticed faint, flickering lights in the distance, and decided to investigate, hoping they might lead us to safety. As we approached the lights, they became clearer, small, glowing orbs floating in the air. The lights danced around us, casting strange, shifting shadows on the trees. We stopped in our tracks, unsure of what to make of them. Suddenly one of the lights flickered out, revealing a figure standing just beyond the trees. It was a person dressed in old-fashioned clothing, almost as if from another era. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. The figure didn't move, and the remaining lights continued to drift about, creating an unsettling ambience. The person finally stepped forward, and we could see their face clearly, a pale, ghostly visage with hollow eyes. We felt a chill run down our spines. The figure spoke in a low, whispering voice, asking if we needed help. We hesitated, but eventually explained our predicament. The figure seemed to nod and motion for us to follow. Despite our apprehension, we decided to trust them. As we followed the figure, the forest seemed to change around us. The once familiar trees now looked strange and twisted, and the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker. The lights continued to dance ahead of us, guiding our way. Eventually we arrived at the edge of the forest, and the figure disappeared into the darkness. We looked around and realized we were back at the trailhead where we had started. Relieved but shaken, we quickly left the forest and returned to the safety of our car. We never saw the figure again, and we couldn't explain what had happened that night. The glowing lights and the ghostly figure remained a mystery. To this day, when we talk about that night, we're not sure if it was a strange encounter with the supernatural or if our minds had played tricks on us in the darkness of the forest. Either way, the memory of the floating lights and the pale figure still haunts us. Story 1. It was a rainy night, and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner where I work. It had been a quiet shift, but I still had a weird amount of energy, so I knew I would need to take a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There were occasional little parking lots with cute strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, but mostly stretches of nothingness, which was actually forest. I was passing one of these parking lots, where a well-known deli was located, and under a light post, I saw a woman standing in the rain with her arm held out, waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman, maybe in her mid-50s. She was tall, like 5', 6', but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door, opened it, and started chanting how much of a hero I was. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet. But I like to think of myself as a good person, and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. As I looked at her while talking, I noticed she was missing a few teeth, which was very off-putting. I wondered if she were homeless, but she didn't smell or look like a homeless person. The rain soaking her clothes could have masked any sense temporarily, and her hair, which may have usually been scraggly and undone, was now weighed down and straightened by the water. Despite this, the woman was smiling the whole time, and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, thinking I might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside, really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey," so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and bought some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot, but it was tiny. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost, helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, and then the two doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was going wild with thoughts. A lot about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points I heard slight sounds from outside my bedroom but dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually never happens when I take melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty. I reached over to the table next to my bed for my water and then saw and heard something across the room. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating. I shook my head violently, made weird noises, and even slapped myself in the face. Then whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream or say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room. After this, no footsteps, no door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Trish, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I continued to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights in the living room. There was no one there. I looked around the entire space and confirmed no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate, but I still slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. What I saw last night, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car, opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp, yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back. My blanket, which I always had back there, was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said to check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, calling the police wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there much longer after that, and so after that month I found a new place to live. Story 2. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and I was hiking one of my favorite trails in the national park near my house. The trail was popular, but on this particular morning, it seemed like I had the whole place to myself. The birds were chirping, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine and earth. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw an older man sitting on a bench, looking out over the valley below. He had a backpack and a walking stick, and he seemed to be resting. "Good morning," I said as I approached. He turned to me with a smile and nodded. "Good morning," he replied. "Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it?" "Absolutely," I said. "Do you come here often?" The man chuckled. "You could say that. I've been hiking these trails for over 50 years. "Wow," I said, impressed. "You must know them like the back of your hand." "I do," he said with a nod. "But there's always something new to see if you keep your eyes open." I sat down on the bench next to him, and we started chatting. He told me about the history of the park, the wildlife he had seen over the years, and some of the more unusual experiences he had had on the trails. As he spoke, I found myself completely absorbed in his stories. He had a way of making the past come alive, and I felt like I was seeing the park through his eyes. After a while, he looked at his watch and said, "I should be getting back. My wife will be wondering where I am." He stood up and shouldered his backpack. "Thanks for the company," I said. "It was great talking with you." "Likewise," he said with a smile. "Enjoy the rest of your hike." I watched him walk away, feeling a sense of gratitude for the unexpected encounter. As I continued on my hike, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before: the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of the wind in the leaves, the patterns of moss on the rocks. It was like I was seeing the trail for the first time, and I couldn't help but think of the man's words, "There's always something new to see if you keep your eyes open." Story 3. During my first year at college, I was assigned a roommate who couldn't have been more different from me. His name was Chris, and he was an extroverted business major with a love for late-night parties, while I was a quiet, introverted computer science student who preferred coding and reading in my free time. Our schedules clashed, and it felt like we were living in two different worlds. One evening, after a particularly noisy night out, Chris stumbled back into our dorm room and collapsed onto his bed, clearly exhausted. I was sitting at my desk, trying to debug a particularly stubborn piece of code. He looked over at me and, with a surprising amount of clarity, asked, "Hey, what are you always working on?" I hesitated for a moment before explaining the project I was working on. It was a basic AI chatbot for one of my classes. To my surprise, Chris seemed genuinely interested. He asked a lot of questions, some of which I struggled to explain in layman's terms, but he listened intently. "That's really cool," he said after I finished. "I never understood how any of that stuff worked, but it sounds amazing." Over the next few weeks, Chris started showing more interest in what I was doing. He would ask about my projects, and I would ask about his business classes and his plans for the future. We started to find common ground in our shared curiosity about each other's worlds. One night he even stayed in to help me brainstorm ideas for my chatbot. In return, I attended one of his business club meetings. I was initially out of my element, but Chris introduced me to his friends and made me feel welcome. I started to see the appeal of his social world and the skills he was developing. As the semester went on, our unlikely friendship grew. We started studying together, combining his business acumen with my technical skills. We even entered a college hackathon as a team, creating a prototype for a budgeting app that won third place. It was a perfect blend of our strengths, and we were both proud of what we had accomplished. By the end of the year, Chris and I had both learned a lot from each other. I had become more comfortable in social settings, and he had gained a new appreciation for technology. We decided to room together again for the next year, looking forward to more late-night coding sessions and business brainstorms. Our friendship taught me that sometimes the most valuable connections come from the most unexpected places, and that stepping out of your comfort zone can lead to incredible growth. Story 4. When I was a kid, my family lived in a small town surrounded by dense woods. My older brother Jake and I loved exploring the forest, but our parents always warned us to stay close to home. They said there were parts of the woods that even the locals avoided. One summer day, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to venture further than we ever had before. Armed with a backpack full of snacks and a homemade map, we set off early in the morning, promising to be back by lunchtime. As we walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and the underbrush thicker. We followed a narrow, winding path that seemed to lead nowhere. After a couple of hours, we stumbled upon a small clearing with a crumbling stone structure in the center. It looked like the remains of an old, abandoned cabin. Jake, being the adventurous one, suggested we take a closer look. We approached the cabin cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was heavy, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Inside the cabin, we found a dusty, tattered journal. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with neat, faded handwriting. It belonged to someone named Henry, who had lived in the cabin decades ago. The entries detailed his life as a recluse, living off the land and avoiding contact with the outside world. One entry stood out to us. It described a hidden cave nearby, where Henry claimed to have discovered strange, glowing stones. Intrigued, Jake and I decided to find the cave. We followed the directions in the journal, navigating through dense underbrush and rocky terrain. After an hour of searching, we found the entrance to the cave, partially hidden behind a thicket. We hesitated for a moment before venturing inside. The cave was dark and cool, the air damp and musty. We used our flashlights to light the way, the beams cutting through the darkness. Deeper inside, we found the glowing stones. They emitted a soft, ethereal light, casting eerie shadows on the cave walls. We were mesmerized, but also a little scared. Jake reached out to touch one of the stones, and to our surprise, it was warm to the touch. We decided to take a few of the stones back with us, carefully wrapping them in cloth and placing them in our backpack. As we made our way out of the cave, we felt a strange sense of unease, as if we were being watched. We hurried back to the cabin and then back home, arriving just before sunset. Our parents were furious that we had wandered so far, but they were also relieved that we were safe. We told them about the cabin, the journal, and the glowing stones. They listened with a mix of fascination and concern. In the days that followed, we tried to learn more about the stones. We showed them to a local geologist who was baffled by their properties. He had never seen anything like them and couldn't explain their glow or warmth. Jake and I kept the stones as a reminder of our adventure. We often wondered about Henry and the life he led in the forest. Our discovery became a local legend, and the story of the glowing stones was passed down through the years. Looking back, that summer adventure taught us the thrill of discovery and the importance of respecting the unknown. It was a lesson we never forgot, even as we grew older and our explorations took us to new and distant places.
Story 1. This happened around 12 years ago when I was 16. I had just started driving, so I went to my mom's house to work on a school paper because her computer was faster than my dad's. It was getting pretty late, and I was alone at home, but everything seemed normal. I wasn't scared or anything. At one point, I took a break from the paper and went to the main bathroom at the back of the house. The wall opposite the door faced the backyard. The door had a small window in it. Just as I was about to turn on the light, I heard something. It wasn't very close or loud, but it was coming from somewhere in the backyard, closer to the house than the small patch of dense trees which acted as a sort of buffer between the street my house was on and the one that runs parallel to it. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just the regular nighttime view with quiet trees and still shadows. But then I noticed the shape of something moving across the yard. At first I didn't think too much about it. I lived in a normal suburban area, and my house is next to 2 streets. It wouldn't be strange for kids to take a shortcut through my unfenced backyard to reach the other street. Even though I tried to make sense of it in my mind, I still felt a bit uneasy. I was by myself, alone at home, and my parents wouldn't be back for a while. They both had jobs working the late shift at aerospace companies, so this made me a bit worried. I went back to the living room, which had a big window facing the front yard and a glass door to the backyard. For a few minutes everything seemed quiet, so I started to calm down, telling myself that I was probably imagining things or it was nothing serious. But then I heard soft sounds coming from near the back door, like someone walking very quietly trying not to make noise. Now, why would someone do that at night? That got my adrenaline going right away. I called my dad, and I whispered to him as quietly as possible about what was happening. Part of me thought I might be making a big deal out of nothing, but another part felt like something bad might happen. He called the police and stayed on the line with me as I grabbed my keys and headed to the other side of the house where the driveway and my car were. He really didn't want me to leave the house, but there was no way I was staying. So the plan was to drive to my dad's and then come back together with him to meet the police here. I can't explain how much I wanted to get out of there. It felt like the worst thing I could do was wait inside until the police arrived or until whoever was outside decided to come in. When I reached the driveway and walked to the car, my whole body was really focused on what I was doing, but I still heard something. It was the sound of quick and sudden footsteps coming towards me. I ran, unlocked the car door, and started the engine. Then I quickly drove out of my driveway. Thankfully, this was not a horror movie moment where the car engine didn't start. It worked just fine, and I got away just in time. I didn't look back as I didn't want to see how close it was. My dad's workplace was a short drive away, and when I reached him, we went back to the house. I was pretty nervous the whole way back, but luckily the police were already there. We met them, and Dad saw that the house was lit up. Every light in every room was on. Every door, even to the attic and the basement, was open, but nothing was taken or touched. This meant something very important and disturbing. The intruder was looking for people, not things to steal or sell. He was looking for someone, maybe a child, and this scared me a lot, thinking about what might have happened if I had stayed in those rooms like my father said. Would I still be alive? Would I have been taken? I don't know. But sometimes trusting your feelings is the best thing to do. When my mother moved away from that place, I was really happy. I just couldn't sleep well there anymore. Story 2. When I was a teenager, my friend's house got broken into. My mom was away, and I was at my friend Alex's house. We lived in a neighborhood that was neither very rich nor very poor, just regular houses in the suburbs. They were not too special, just typical American homes with yards that were not too big or too small. My friend Alex lived just down the street, and I liked hanging out and sleeping over at his place. Also, I didn't enjoy staying home alone at night. My mom wasn't sure if I was ready for it either, as I was around 12 years old, a shy kid who always played on the Xbox. I didn't do sports and my dad wasn't around much, so I was close to my mom. Even though it might be a bit embarrassing to admit, I was afraid to stay home by myself all night. Luckily, Alex's parents, Josh and Haley, were really nice and let me sleep over. I think it was a Saturday night, and Alex's family had guests over. They were cooking outside and having drinks by the fire. Meanwhile, Alex, his younger cousins, and I were playing in the yard, throwing a ball, jumping on the trampoline, and swimming in their pool. After a few hours of fun, we got tired. We spent some time inside, then went back outside for a bit to hang out with the grown-ups until it was time for us to go in. Around 11, his parents told us to get ready for bed. They put on a movie for all of us kids in the basement and set up sleeping bags. We were watching some horror movie, I can't remember what it was, but I fell asleep after a while. Being a light sleeper, it wasn't a surprise when I heard one of the doors in the basement opening along with some loud footsteps coming down the stairs. I lifted my head to see what was happening, but it was really dark and I couldn't see much. I thought it might be one of Alex's little cousins going to the bathroom or something, so I laid back down, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. But soon I woke up to a loud pounding noise. I couldn't figure out what the banging was, but it seemed to be coming from behind us near the stairs. Alex's basement was a good size, and we were in the living room part of it. On the other side there was a bar, about 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom. I thought I heard the noise from downstairs, but I wasn't completely sure. I thought it might be one of the grown-ups, maybe getting something from downstairs, so I tried closing my eyes again. It was really dark down there, and I didn't think it would be a stranger. Or maybe I thought one of the adults went to the bathroom too. I didn't have a phone to check the time or call anyone. I wasn't sure I needed to anyway. I sat and listened for a while, but I couldn't hear the adults partying outside anymore. Maybe they were done for the night and coming in to check on us, I thought. You know when you were a kid and thought there were monsters under your bed or in the closet, that scary feeling, but deep down you knew there was nothing to be scared of because it wasn't real. It kind of felt like that. So I went back to sleep one more time, But this time what happened was way scarier than the last time. I woke up to a man on top of me, shaking me and trying to grab me. He was a stranger, and it terrified me. I could see the fear in the eyes of the other kids and Alex. I tried to fight, kicking and screaming, but eventually the strange man managed to grab me tightly and started to run. I tried everything to get away, kicking, biting, scratching, even trying to poke the man's eyes with my fingers, but nothing was working. I felt so scared. That is until Alex's dad came running and hit the man in the head with a fire extinguisher. We both fell to the ground on the sidewalk, and I hit my head on the cement. Somehow the man managed to stand up and run away. Since he had a mask on, we couldn't identify him. I wonder if things would have been different if the other adults were still there. Maybe they would have chased the man, beat him up, and he would have gotten arrested. After that night, for a really long time, I couldn't sleep. The same bad dream kept coming back and playing in my head over and over. We believe the man got in through the sliding glass door in the basement. I wonder how long he stood there planning the attack. If I had listened to my feelings, maybe things would have turned out differently. Even though I tried my best, I ended up with a concussion. It wasn't too serious, but still a concussion. Since that day, no matter what, I always trust my gut feelings. I recommend you do the same. It's better to be safe than sorry, trust me. I'm also really grateful that Alex's parents were still awake. Otherwise, something really terrible might have happened to me, like getting hurt or taken away, or even worse. Story 3. One night when I was about 13 years old, I stayed over at my friend's house. My friend Ethan and I had a lot in common. We both loved playing video games and watching scary movies. That night we decided to have a movie marathon. We made a list of all the horror movies we wanted to watch, grabbed some snacks, and settled in for the night. Ethan's parents were out of town, so we had the whole house to ourselves. We started the first movie around 8 p.m. The lights were off, and the only illumination came from the TV screen. As the night went on, we watched movie after movie, each one scarier than the last. By the time we got to the third movie, it was already past midnight, and the house was completely silent. We were both really into the movie when suddenly we heard a loud crash coming from upstairs. We both jumped and looked at each other with wide eyes. At first we thought it was just the movie playing tricks on us, but then we heard it again. This time it was followed by a series of footsteps. Ethan paused the movie, and we sat there in complete silence, trying to figure out what was going on. Ethan decided to go upstairs and check it out. I wanted to go with him, but he told me to stay put. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly made his way up the stairs. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Ethan moving around upstairs, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan came back downstairs, looking pale and shaken. He told me he couldn't find anything, but he felt like someone was watching him the whole time. We tried to brush it off as our imaginations playing tricks on us, but we couldn't shake the feeling of unease. We decided to call it a night and went to bed. Ethan's room was in the basement, and we both felt a little safer being down there. We locked the door and tried to get some sleep. I had a hard time falling asleep, and every little noise made me jump. Eventually, I managed to drift off, but my sleep was restless. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just Ethan talking in his sleep, but then I realized the whispers were coming from the other side of the room. I sat up and looked around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I was too scared to get out of bed, so I just sat there, listening to the whispers. They were faint, but I could hear them clearly. They sounded like they were coming from just outside the door. I wanted to wake Ethan, but I didn't want to make any noise. I was frozen with fear, unable to move. The whispers continued for what felt like hours, but eventually they stopped. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, too scared to go back to sleep. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little better, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Ethan woke up and asked me if I had heard anything last night. I told him about the whispers, and he looked just as scared as I felt. We decided to check the house one more time, just to be sure. We searched every room, but we didn't find anything. There were no signs of a break-in, and nothing was out of place. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just our imaginations, but deep down we both knew something was off. We spent the rest of the day trying to distract ourselves with video games and other activities, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I have no idea what caused those noises, and I never stayed at Ethan's house again. Story 4. I lived in Georgia with my parents for my whole life. Then, one Friday evening while we were having dinner, Dad shared some really important news. He said, "My company offered me a really good job. They want me to be the boss for their work in Florida in a place called Tampa. If I say yes, our family would move there together. The company will pay for moving, and they'll also help us buy a new house if we want." He then said the news surprised him a bit, but he wants us to think about it. He said we could see it as a fresh start since we haven't had a holiday for a while, especially not to Florida, so he thinks we should give it a try. Mom and I nodded and said, "Okay then." Mom asked Dad, "How much time do you have to decide if you want the job?" He said, 2 weeks, and if it's a yes, then however long it takes to buy a house in Tampa." A week later, we had another meeting where we all agreed to the idea of moving to Tampa, Florida. I could sense Dad's happiness because he really wanted this job. Shortly after, Mom and Dad arranged a visit to Tampa to explore potential houses. Typically, they spent long weekends there, returning on Mondays to update me on any properties they found interesting. Unfortunately, it took more than a month to find a good house, but it was worth waiting for. Mom and Dad brought me along for a second look to hear what I thought. The house had 4 bedrooms, an outside hot tub, and a double garage. The gardens weren't huge, but the back one was a bit bigger than the front. Inside, it was modern and the rooms were pretty big. Mom really liked the kitchen, which was twice as big as our current one. My mom is an excellent cook, and her food is the best I've ever had, even when eating out. I liked the house, and after some tough talking, Dad managed to buy it. After that, we got really busy. We had to put our current house up for sale and at the same time go through all the things we've stored over the years. Dad said we need to be strict and only keep what we really use and need. Anything we don't need has to go, as we don't want to fill up the new house with things we're just keeping for no reason. It was a bit surprising for me, but in the end I had 15 boxes of things to get rid of. Some went to charity, and some broken stuff just went in the trash. Dad was almost as bad as me. He had 10 boxes to get rid of. But my mom, she only had 3. After we finished this, it didn't take long to get a good offer on the house, which Dad accepted. Then we picked a day to move in. Just 6 weeks later, we were in the new house, surrounded by boxes and eating takeout. For about 10 days, we survived on TV dinners and takeout until we could sort out the kitchen. Finally, we got things in order, but we noticed Dad was spending more time at work learning new systems and getting to know his team. He seemed to enjoy the challenge. Meanwhile, I found a job where I could work from home using my computer. It suited me better than my old office job in Georgia. It meant I could take breaks and go for a swim in our big hot tub. It was more like a pool, but the water was warm as it had a cover with those cool massage jets. After that, I had lunch on the patio and then went back to work. It felt so different from before. We had 2 houses nearby, one on each side. The house on our right was empty, and there was a sign in the front yard saying it was for sale. You could see through the windows that there was no furniture inside, and there were never any cars in the driveway. The house on our left was lived in, but the owner hadn't tried to talk to us since we moved in 2 weeks ago. We thought it was just a man living there because we saw him driving in and out in the early evening, but he never had anyone else in the car with him. I waved at him twice when he got out of his car, but he just stared at me for a bit too long and then looked away each time. Mom said some people are just strange, so not to worry much about it. There are folks who hear you say hi or see you wave but choose to ignore you. Maybe it's how they were raised or part of their culture where it's considered rude to say hi back on whatever planet he's from. Story 5. I was born in a small village in Italy. My childhood was filled with the aroma of fresh pasta, the sound of church bells, and the warmth of family gatherings. My parents owned a little trattoria, where they served the most delicious food in town. I spent my days playing with my siblings and helping out in the restaurant. Life was simple and beautiful. However, when I turned 18, I decided it was time for a change. I wanted to see the world, experience new cultures, and find my own path. So, I packed my bags and moved to New York City. New York was a completely different world. The skyscrapers, the bustling streets, and the diverse cultures were overwhelming at first. I found a small apartment in Brooklyn and started working at an Italian restaurant. The job was tough, but it reminded me of home. I made new friends, learned new skills, and gradually adapted to the fast-paced life of the city. Every now and then I would call my parents and tell them about my adventures. They were proud of me, but always reminded me to stay true to my roots. One evening, after a long shift at the restaurant, I decided to take a walk in Central Park. The city lights were sparkling, and the air was crisp. As I strolled through the park, I stumbled upon a small group of people gathered around a street performer. Curious, I joined the crowd. The performer was a young woman playing the violin. Her music was enchanting, and I was mesmerized. After she finished her performance, I approached her and struck up a conversation. Her name was Lily, and she was a talented musician from Paris. We quickly became friends, and our friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Lily and I spent every moment we could together. We explored the city, shared our dreams, and supported each other's ambitions. She introduced me to the world of music, and I taught her about Italian cuisine. Our relationship was a beautiful blend of cultures and passions. We even started performing together. She would play the violin, and I would sing traditional Italian songs. Our performances became popular, and we were invited to play at various events around the city. However, as time went on, we faced challenges. Balancing our careers and relationship was not easy. There were times when we argued and times when we doubted our future together. But through it all, we never gave up on each other. Our love and commitment grew stronger with each passing day. We learned to communicate better, support each other more, and cherish the moments we had together. One winter evening, as we were performing at a cozy cafe in the West Village, I realized how much I loved Lily. The way she smiled, the way she played her violin, and the way she made me feel was indescribable. After our performance, I took her hand and led her to a quiet corner of the cafe. I looked into her eyes and told her how much she meant to me. Then, I got down on one knee and proposed. She said yes, and we were both overjoyed. We got married in a small ceremony in Central Park, surrounded by our closest friends. It was a magical day filled with love, laughter, and music. My parents flew in from Italy, and Lily's family came from Paris. It was a beautiful union of two cultures and two families. After our wedding, we continued to pursue our passions and dreams. We traveled the world, performed at various venues, and created unforgettable memories together. Years have passed since that day, and our love has only grown stronger. We've had our share of ups and downs, but we've always faced them together. We've built a beautiful life, filled with love, music, and adventure. And every time I think about our journey, I feel grateful for the day I took that walk in Central Park. Story 6. When I was a child, my family and I would spend every summer at our cabin by the lake. The cabin was a small, wooden structure nestled in the woods. It had a rustic charm that made it feel like a second home. My siblings and I would spend our days swimming, fishing, and exploring the surrounding forest. The evenings were reserved for family dinners and storytelling around the campfire. It was a tradition that we all cherished. One summer, when I was 12 years old, something extraordinary happened. It was a hot, sunny day, and my siblings and I were playing by the lake. We were splashing in the water and laughing when suddenly we noticed something glimmering at the bottom of the lake. Curious, we dove down to investigate. To our surprise, we discovered an old, rusty chest. We managed to bring it to the surface and opened it, revealing a collection of old coins, jewelry, and a mysterious map. We were thrilled by our discovery and immediately ran to show our parents. They were equally fascinated and encouraged us to follow the map. The map seemed to lead to a location deep in the forest, so we packed some supplies and set off on an adventure. The journey was not easy. We had to navigate through dense underbrush, cross a small stream, and climb a steep hill. But we were determined to uncover the treasure. After hours of trekking, we finally arrived at the spot marked on the map. It was a small clearing with an ancient oak tree in the center. We searched around the tree and soon found a hidden trapdoor. Excitedly, we opened it and descended into a dark, underground chamber. The chamber was filled with old artifacts, paintings, and books. It was like stepping into a forgotten world. We spent hours exploring the chamber, marveling at the treasures we had found. When we returned to the cabin, we couldn't wait to tell our parents about our adventure. They were amazed by our discovery and praised us for our bravery and determination. That summer became one of the most memorable experiences of our lives. We spent the rest of our vacation cataloging the artifacts and researching their history. We even donated some of the items to a local museum. As the years went by, our family continued to visit the cabin every summer. The memories of that extraordinary adventure remained a special bond that we all shared. The discovery of the hidden treasure taught us the value of curiosity, perseverance, and teamwork. It also reminded us of the magic that can be found in the most unexpected places.